My name is Pritish Nandy. I lived in Calcutta during the period of the Bangladesh War. I was a young man, just out of my teens, barely out of my teens, I would say. And I used to be a writer, a poet, and till then, a part-time journalist. Later, journalism became my full-time profession. And one of the reasons why it became my full-time profession was because I saw the battle, the war, the iniquity that was going on, and it motivated me to commit myself to a life of journalism hence. The massacres made a lot of difference. That kind of inspired everyone. That made everyone get up and say, hey, this has to stop. Then at that point of time, my friends, Kaifi Azmi, Kaifi was much, much older than me. He must have been in his 40s then. Kaifi, me, Sardar Jafri, then there was Sajjad Saheed, who was once the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Pakistan and had left and was living in India at that point of time. That's the Urdu lot. Then there was the Bengali lot, Shunil Ganguly, and the whole lot, Shakti. Everybody felt very strongly about this. And we decided that we must do something. And at that time, Calcutta was teeming with people coming in. So a lot of the fighters would come in, and my house became a center of discussions. My house became a center of activity, political activity. And that's where I met a lot of the freedom fighters who would come in, some with a damaged hand, some with a leg blown off by a mine. And we would put them in hospitals, we would get them cured, they would stay in my house. And there was a lot of stories we heard from each one of them. Some became friends. One of them fell in love with the High Commissioner's daughter, even though the High Commissioner was still committed to the Pakistani side at that point of time. So we kind of persuaded him, and they got married. And they got married in Blue Fox, I still remember, and every major army person was there. And if a bomb had fallen on Blue Fox on Park Street that night, it would have wiped off the entire Bangladesh army leadership. It was almost, it was great fun, and a lot of people. It wasn't fun in the sense that it was a lot of horror stories, and we were all trying to collect monies, we were all trying to help in whatever way we could. And there was no planned action. Indira Gandhi was a friend of mine, so I could pick up she has been an admirer of my poetry for many years, till then, at least 3-4 years. And so I could pick up the phone and talk to her. So there was conversation going on at all levels. And we were trying to absorb the war, understand the war. The fun was in the fact that it generated a lot of great creative writing in Bengal itself, in Urdu, in Hindi, in other literatures in Bengal, in India. And the war became as much our war as the war of the people of Bangladesh. I think that was a critical point. For the very first time, all of India united, stood together behind one cause and said, this is as much our cause as the cause of the people of Bangladesh. I think that was one of the most critical moments in our history, the history of India, because the last time we ever did it was when we all stood together behind Gandhi for the freedom struggle, our own freedom struggle. But that later got smeared with the blood of the partition riots. And so, most people were happy to forget that for a while and focus on this new war, another war of freedom. Luckily, in those days, wars of freedom actually achieve results. Che Guevara and Fidel Castro achieved results for Cuba. Not necessarily all good, but the point is, freedom struggles won. Freedom struggles could actually win. Nowadays, all struggles kind of reach a stalemate, and wars continue for decades. I mean, that began with the Vietnam War, actually. They continue for decades, and then there's a stalemate, and nothing is actually achieved. Finally, America got humbled and went away, which was fun in Vietnam. America always comes, fights, and then goes away. Packs up and goes away. But the fun here was that here was a battle which we realized was a just battle. And it was a battle that was won. And that was won with swiftness, with alacrity, with absolute military precision, and with great emotional joy. When refugees enter another nation, people get very worried. People get concerned. Holy Christ, this place is going to get entirely overridden by these guys. But in this particular case, what bonded us was a common language to begin with. What bonded us was a common cause, which is the fight for freedom, justice, fight against iniquity. So, therefore, for the first time, actually, the refugees who came in there did not evoke hostility, nor did they evoke, let's say, unpleasantness, but rather they were welcomed as brothers across the border. And everybody somehow felt that they will win this war and go back, which many of them did, most of them did, in fact. And a beautiful relationship evolved between the host nation and the fighting nation. I think that was the magic of that period. And that period was replete with, it was a great period of Bengal, cultural period of Bengal. There were great writers, great filmmakers, great musicians, you name it. You name it. They could, some of the finest talent of the past century, some of the finest talent that ever walked this planet were there working, creating in Calcutta, right at the time when this was taking place. I seriously believe that has been the most brilliant period of Indian culture. And many of those who were not in Calcutta identified with the cause and participated in the cause, like Maqbool Fida Hussain, who was living in Mumbai, but very strongly felt for the cause. Kaifi Azmi was living in Mumbai, but very strongly felt for the cause. I had friends all across India who felt for the cause. I helped to mobilize them, and I helped to bring them together on the same platform with the people of Bangladesh. We held mushahiras because, it was important, because you must realize that there were dichotomies in the battle. The Indian Muslim, many of whom were Bihari Muslims, many of whom were UP Muslims, didn't have great empathy for the Bengali Muslim. They had great empathy for the Bihari Muslims who were the collaborators with the existing regime in Bangladesh, in East Pakistan. So there were dichotomies. There were people who were not terribly convinced, but the entire intellectual leadership of India, particularly the Muslim intellectuals, many of whom were my friends, I think we were able to move the entire lot in one direction and see it as we wanted it to be seen. So Kaifi wrote a poem called Bangladesh. In fact, many people wrote poems about Bangladesh, but Kaifi wrote one which was, I think, very powerful and swayed a lot of local Muslims who had ambiguous feelings as to who you support. It says, I'm not a country that you can incinerate me. I'm not a wall that you can raise me to the ground. Not a frontier you can obliterate. This obsolete map of the world that you have spread before you on the table is only a maze of wavered lines. Where can you find me amidst these lines? I'm the passion of the obsessed, the deathless dream of the oppressed. When a man sucks the blood of other men, when exploitation crosses all limits and tyranny breaks all bounds, I suddenly appear in some corner, and I rise from within some heart. You must have seen me before, sometimes in the east and sometimes in the west, sometimes in cities, sometimes in villages, in habitations and in the wilderness. I have only a history and no geography, and such history that is forbidden to be taught, which people read in clandestine, where I am sometimes the victor, sometimes the vanquished, sometimes I execute my own murderers, and sometimes I am myself crucified. The only difference is this: my murderers die, but I don't, for I cannot die. How senseless you are. How senseless you are. The tanks you have received as arms, you roll them onto my heart. All day and night you rain napalm on me. Listen, you will tire one day. How will you shackle my hands? My hands are 70 million. Which head will you axe? I have 70 million heads on my shoulders. My expressing of my support for Bangladesh was one voice, but to build support across the cultures of India. So I got Amrita Pritham to come out and speak. I got others to come out and speak. I got people from all over the world to come out and speak and publish and draw for Bangladesh and raise funds for Bangladesh. So people could go there and stay there and live there on those funds. So all that was part of the larger exercise, the larger dream of Bangladesh. And the interesting one was that we were all convinced that Bangladesh would happen, which was actually factually true. We were trying to dismember Pakistan also, but that was merely a part of the exercise. The larger dream was a free Bangladesh. I mean, that's the problem with politics, you know. There are no truths and no lies. Everything is actually relevant, and they all form truths eventually. So the point is, barring those few pockets, there was euphoria all over the country. And Mrs. Gandhi was Durga. Hussain painted her as Durga, that she had gone out on a limb against America, against every major force in the world, stood up against global power, the biggest global powers, and said, no, we will support the freedom fighters. We will support the freedom struggle. We will not allow this battle to be lost. I think that was the greatest achievement ever of anybody in the Gandhi family. I'm not a great supporter of the Gandhis. I don't think they've done great stuff for India, ultimately. But the single biggest achievement of the Gandhi family, Nehru-Gandhi family, the biggest legacy of that family is the formation of Bangladesh. One's heart is full. One feels very touched. But nations move on. Life moves on. And I never really thought that 40 years later Bangladesh would suddenly wake up and remember that they had friends who had once worked shoulder to shoulder with them to make the country free. That is wonderful that it happened. I don't know if it's one of the good ones or not, but there was an incident which happened in Chuadanga on which this was based. Each time the charred tree raged, Chuadanga was in her eyes. And each time the wild birds sang, they ravaged the silent countryside. She had known one death and shared another with the screams of corpses and the burning of the vulture. She had known exile from her city of dreams. And yet, each time he tore through her limbs the phantom masks of summer fell. She had shared fear with the night in her loins, and the voices she had heard were human guides, but each time she faced the dusk, Chuadanga burned through her sullen eyes. The passion of 19 summers, she was 19, the passion of 19 summers coursed through her veins, and the men in her languid dreams burnt out on that one night when they came with vengeance in their thighs. They raped her and then murdered her. No, she had not felt pain nor fury. And when she had winced, it was not out of shame, but because 19 summers raged through the silent countryside. Not pain, but the bayonet inside her aching thigh. Outside the night had raged, even when the dark within her concealed its fears. Even when she heard the dialogue of fire and the Padma licked its wounds, blood-drawn, blood-draped, raped by the night. Her tousled hair, brute lips, his tousled hair, brute lips, and fearful fingers tore through her silent loins, but she did not move. When she bled, he left. In that single act of vengeance, torn, ravaged, silent woman, she had known the unknown again. Tonight, when the fire burns out near the checkpost at Bongao, when the scream of vultures echoes in a city of dreams, only the voice of silent protest will repeat her fate. The faith of a woman who lost a war, but survived with hate, and Chuadanga in her eyes. There are lots of tragic tales, and the great poets. Subhash Mukherjee was one of the greatest poets. He wrote a small poem. We are like the two eyes of Bengal. The nose separates us, but that does not matter. The door is locked, so I pull open the window. The Bengal on the other side is the same Bengal as mine. You know, this made the difference. This opened the windows of the mind. Some wrote angry poems like I did. Some wrote passionate poems like Kaifi did. Some wrote gentle poems like Subhash did. But all these awoke the world to the cause of Bangladesh. I think that was important. These were read at public gatherings, vast, large, huge public gatherings. Poetry had huge gatherings in those days. They were distributed, they sold in lakhs at the time. They had all the independent publishers who distributed them, and people contributed money. Those monies were used for people who went there and stayed there in those countries for a few months during the war, who escaped there, found shelter there. Oh, it was absolutely euphoric. It was like our victory. And all of India, to a man, stood up and felt proud that we had won a war. This is a book where we collected some of the poems of Bangladesh and collated them with poems by Indians supporting the Bangladesh struggle. So it's the beginning of the struggle. This was the first. It was a special issue of a magazine. That led to this book, Poems from Bangladesh, which featured some of the best-known poets of Bangladesh, whose poems we could lay our hands on at that point of time. It was not easy. This is a book which appeared from London and New York, with drawings by Europe's most famous painter of the time, Felix Topolsky. It was published by the Sri Lankan poet, Thambi Muttu, and was a huge, huge success in terms of motivating people. This was another book, Voice of a New Nation, because by that time, Bangladesh had become a nation. So these four books in sequence represent the course of history. The first was the attempt by Indian poets and local poets to support them together with some of their voices so people could get introduced to the work of Bangladesh poets. The second was a book of poems on them, where you say poems from Bangladesh, where you are claiming that Bangladesh exists. It didn't exist. The third was a global book, which took the cause all over the world. And the fourth was Once Bangladesh Had Been Formed. I think this picture was also by Raghu Rai, one of our best-known photographers of that period. She lived in a lonely village. All day she worked at home silently, hardly noticed the sun throbbing in the summer sky and rafts of clouds sailing by. She did not notice time moving on. Everything was familiar, painted in gentle colors, an intricate pattern woven carefully, a pot of boiling rice, greens, some fish, a plebeian meal for her husband, a school teacher. At times she would glance at the creepers near the fence, or at the yellow bird on the jackfruit tree wagging its tail endlessly, and time would move on. A quick bath by the well, and she would comb her graying tresses thinking of her son in the local school, memorizing multiplication tables. She would think of her eldest son as she filled the jar with sweets in pretty wrappings, her large bright eyes the city in which he'd studied. Her footfalls would never be heard outside the small world of her own. She would never venture out. It was a self-imposed exile, a simple life of her own. Only the memories of her dead parents would sometimes rake up pangs of nostalgia. And then suddenly one day her entire country reared its head like a raging god. News came in of martyrdom and blood-smeared soil. The blood-spattered clothes of her son drew her out of her village home. She went. She left behind those creepers near the fence, the river, the field, and the familiar pond. Today her footfalls can be heard on the roads of the city, down the narrow streets and the alleys. Memories of her dead son and the tears of her stricken heart merge with the slogans that reverberate. That was a time when art built bridges, when art brought politics together. People of different faiths, beliefs, convictions, politics together.